Boa noite a todos que nos assistem. Hoje nós vamos ter uma conversa com Tom Vacek. Ele é economista, estudou com José em Stanford, trabalhava na Goldman Sachs e ele vai falar um pouco sobre como foi a experiência dele de morar em Hong Kong e, e um pouco da vida dele lá, como é que funciona, porque Hong Kong é tido como o território mais livre, economicamente falando. Então a gente vai conversar com ele sobre isso. Hi Tom, how are you?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Good.
So introduce a little bit about, say a little bit about yourself. What do you do? What do you like? And then we'll go to
Okay,
the
sure.
most.
I can give you a little introduction. I'm originally from the Czech Republic. I grew up there half my life, and then we moved, and I lived with my family for 6 years in Japan, 4 years in Hong Kong for high school, and after that, I came out to the States. I graduated from Stanford University in 2010. I did a bachelor's degree in economics, and I've been living in New York now for 5 years. I've worked 3 different jobs. I started off, I used to be a derivatives trader for Goldman Sachs, specializing in equity options and dispersion and variance swaps, etc. And then after that, I was M&A for healthcare, specializing in large international multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions. And I currently work for Silver Lake doing technology private equity. So we buy large-scale private equity companies in technology and technology-enabled businesses. We own them for 5 to 7 years, and then we sell them again. So that's what I do. I'm very much specialized in finance and financial modeling and financial analysis and economics. So
Very good. So, José, let's start with the questions.
So Tom,
okay.
so we've met many times, and every time we've met, I was always very surprised by the stories you will tell about Hong Kong and how easy it was to do business there and the economic environment in general in the city. So let's, if you could share a little bit of your experience in Hong Kong regarding the business environment, regarding the taxes, the education system. Just give a brief overview of what Hong Kong looks like for us.
Absolutely. So I prepared a couple of what I think are the highlights of what it is really, so special that makes Hong Kong such an amazing free country. So let me start off. I'll tell you, maybe like 5-10 minutes about some of these highlights what make Hong Kong unique, and then you can ask me some more questions about it, any of the topics that you're interested in. Does that sound good?
Sounds good. Sounds great.
So let me start off. Probably one of the most interesting things about Hong Kong is the tax policy. So the tax policy in Hong Kong is set up in a way such that if you are, let's start with personal income taxes. Personal income taxes, people are very much incentivized to work, to be productive. And the way the Hong Kong government does that is 2 things. First of all, tax forms are extremely simple. I've seen tax forms in Hong Kong where it's literally 1/2 of a page. How much did you make minus your standard deduction times your percentage equals your tax, and that's it. And that's as simple as that. I do taxes in the United States. My taxes last year in the United States were 400 pages long. It's crazy complicated, right? Like it's amazing. Like I spend probably like multiple weeks dealing with just figuring out how to do my taxes. So one is the simplicity. It's a very efficient government. Everything is online. The government, all the employers report how much you've made to the government at the end of the year. The government says, you made $100,000, that's great. Subtract the standard deduction, multiply it by the percentage, this is your tax. That's it. It's very simple. That's one. The second thing that's very good about it is the tax rates are very low. So the way it works is you get personal income tax deductions, and there's a few tax brackets, but basically they stop about at 15,000 US dollars, about 120,000 Hong Kong dollars. So it's about 15,000 US dollars is the top tax bracket. Everything after that, you pay a flat tax of 17%. So that's 17%, and that's it. It doesn't matter whether you made $100 million or whether you made $10,000, whatever it is. Like there's one flat tax. Once you go above $15,000, it's just 17%. What is even more interesting about it, as you dig a little deeper, though, is especially if I compare it to other regimes around this world where there's all sorts of very crazy complicated tax structures, and you tax all sorts of different income at different rates, and there's capital gains versus interest taxes and all sorts of other taxes. In Hong Kong, it's very simple again. Basically, what they say is if you make money in the stock market from capital gains, if you make money in investing in bonds and you earn interest, all of that money is tax-free. That's not even reported as your income. So if you make an investment, the investment does well, they encourage people to invest capital in the economy because they say, look, if you've made an investment and you've generated a profit, congratulations to you, you've done well, that money is yours and it belongs to you. So the only taxes that people pay are on their personal income tax. So if you are employed, if you have a company and the company pays you a salary, etc., then you will pay income taxes. But even so, the taxes are very minimal. It's only 17% at the top tax rate bracket, and it's very efficient. It's very simple. So that's one thing to think about, is the concept of tax structure. So then you ask, okay, that's great, but how does the government collect money? How does the economy function? What are the public services like? If people don't pay any tax, how can the government survive? How can they generate money? So it's actually interesting because tax compliance is so high because it's so simple and the taxes are so low that the government generates so much revenue from their taxes. And because Hong Kong is also a big economic center for wealth, for trade, for business with China, etc., there's so much wealth creation happening in the country, and there's so much economic activity that even if you tax people at a very low rate of 17% on income, and there's a small real estate tax as well, but you don't take any of their capital gains, you don't take any of their interest, you let that have, people can have that for free. The government generates so much of a surplus that even though they provide for excellent public education, they provide for subsidized housing in like the suburbs, etc., for the poorer communities, because housing is one of the few things in Hong Kong which is very expensive. So the government provides all these services, but because tax compliance is so high and the economic output and the economy is so efficient, it actually turns out that the government generates a surplus every year. And not only do they generate a surplus, some years they generate a very high surplus. So let me give you an example. For about 4 years ago, I received an email from the Hong Kong government. Everything's efficient. They send me an email. Even though I'm no longer living in the country, they reach out to me because I'm a resident of Hong Kong. I'm a permanent resident. I'm not a full citizen, but I'm a permanent resident. And the government sent out an email and they say, thank you everyone for paying your taxes. We've done a tremendous job managing the budget. Everything that we wanted to do is taken care of and paid for. We ran an 100 billion Hong Kong dollar surplus. So I don't know what it was, about $12 billion or so US dollars. And they're like, this money was paid by the citizens. It belongs to the citizens. And they send everybody a personal check. So I live out of the country now, but because I'm a permanent resident in Hong Kong, they send me a check for 1,000 US dollars, and they're like, we have this surplus of money, we could go spend it on stupid projects, but that's not the right thing to do. This money was paid by our taxpayers. There's very little corruption, there's very little inefficiency. We're not going to just spend money because we have it. The money was paid for by the citizens. Here's your money back. Like we collected extra money, take it back. So that's really, like, I think fundamentally one of the most amazing things about Hong Kong is the government is very efficient, very responsible, very low corruption. There is, it's unheard of that there would be like any big corruption scandals or anything like that. And because of that, all that effort is reinvested back into the economy and into making the economy more efficient, into making people wealthier, into producing, and basically it's a very free market capitalist economy at its most extreme. I'll give you a couple more examples, and we can chat, depending on what other topics you'd like to talk about. You might ask, okay, well, so why is it that Hong Kong is so strategically located, and why is there so much wealth generated? the interesting thing about Hong Kong is in many ways it serves as a gateway to China, and that makes it a unique place to be, because China's system is a little more enclosed. Their laws are more complicated. Doing business in China is a lot tougher for all sorts of reasons. You read about, political issues in China, etc. And that's not the topic of today's conversation. But the beautiful thing about Hong Kong is it's used to be a British colony, so everything is set up with a British law in mind. So it runs very much on an electoral system. There's a parliament, there's democracy, there's courts, and the courts uphold the law, etc. So what happens is a lot of foreign companies will open offices in Hong Kong to serve as the gateway to China. Because the people in Hong Kong, there's a lot of Chinese people in Hong Kong who understand how to deal with China. And there's a lot of foreign companies who need to interact with China, but they don't want to go to China directly. So Hong Kong basically becomes like the middleman who facilitates the movements of trade, goods, and services. In order to support that and in order to encourage that free market, you read about a lot of countries who impose import taxes or export taxes or tariffs or embargoes or anything like that. Hong Kong, you can move goods in and out of the country as much as you want. Nobody cares. The only things that you can get taxed on is alcohol, tobacco, and I believe oil. I think those are the only three things where there is potentially some import tax to consider. Otherwise, you want to move goods in, you want to move goods out, go for it. Like it's free, it's easy, it's a big shipping port, and everybody uses that as a big gateway to China, really, for interacting with China. The other thing that makes it very good from that perspective is they've pegged the exchange rate to the US dollar, and it's been very stable for many, many years, for decades. And it's pegged at 7.8. It varies very, very little, like 0.00%. Like it never moves. It's pegged and it's managed. And because of that, you have a country where people know that every time they do business with you, they know exactly what the price is going to be. And they know if I buy goods in Hong Kong now and it takes me, I don't know, half a year to get them delivered, or if I send a payment and I'm getting services in Hong Kong, whatever it is, I don't have to worry about exchange risk, because my currency is pegged to the US dollar. I know exactly that my exchange rate is going to be 7.8 in, and it's going to be 7.8 on the other side going out. So that helps stimulate that economic investment. So we've talked about income taxes. We've talked about how Hong Kong serves as a gateway to China and why that makes it a little bit of a unique country and a unique position. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to talk about, which I thought would be interesting for the group and the audience here, is how difficult is it to do business? You guys are in Brazil. Jose told me a lot about his business and how things function, and sometimes how difficult it is to get things done. So I can give you some examples. I've incorporated my own company when I was that's been a long time ago. When I was 19. While I was still in school, and it's so easy to set up a company. You walk over, you fill out a couple of forms. It costs about altogether, all the legal documents, everything altogether is about $500, maybe $1,000 now, to set up a company, fully incorporated, everything. The banks will open you a bank account, and you can start doing business right away. Like, you want to do something, you want to start doing import-export, go for it. You want to start writing computer software, go for it. You want to open up, a kitchen, go for it. Like, people are very much encouraged to go out there. So it's a very entrepreneurial economy. A lot of people set up small businesses, and that's why, the cost of living is very cheap in Hong Kong. The only thing that's expensive is the real estate, because it's owned and controlled by a few very large companies and the developer companies who build big skyscraper residential buildings, and as a result the prices are high. But everything else, food, clothing, events, going out, entertainment, everything is super cheap, because it's a very competitive economy. And people are encouraged to go out there and start businesses. And people say, as soon as there's a big profit opportunity, there will be people who set up businesses, because it's very easy to set up businesses. So, okay, you've set up your business. Now what do? A lot of countries have huge reporting requirements, huge requirements about taxes, and how all the other things that you now do. Okay, you now have a business, you have to collect sales taxes, right? Like, I don't know about Brazil, but if you have like a VAT tax, In Hong Kong, there's nothing like that. Nothing. There's no VAT tax. Like you sell something for $100, you sold something for $100. The money is yours. Congratulations. You've made a sale for $100. It's all yours, right? You can deduct whatever expenses you want on your income tax return. The income tax return is very easy. Like in some companies where we hire accounting firms that spend tens of millions of dollars preparing an income tax return for our company. Where was the profit here? How does it flow through? What can we deduct against? All these crazy rules about like, okay, how is this amortized? How is this depreciated? Can we add it back? Is this GAAP tax? Is this effective tax? Is this state tax? Is this federal tax? Is this NOL? There's so many different rules. In Hong Kong, it's a very simple form. It's like, what was your revenue? Subtract your costs. You can deduct whatever costs you want. Like, you know, it's your business. This is your net income times, you know, a corporate tax rate, which is also very low in the low double digits, and the rest of the money is yours. Congratulations, you made a profit. Well done. Keep the business going. And if you have any employees, you file like a one-piece form of paper where you say, okay, I have these employees. Here's how much money they've been paid in salary, and that's it. And that way the employees can, you know, the government knows and they can pay their taxes, and compliance is very high because you just told the government, I have 10 employees, this person made $100,000, this person made $50,000, this person made $30,000. One form, you send it to the government's like, thank you. And then they contact the people and they're like, by the way, we know you made $100,000. We already calculated your taxes. We already know what you're supposed to pay in taxes. Just send us the check and we're done, right? So it's very efficient. It's very efficient. Doing business in Hong Kong is super easy. It's encouraged that people go out there, start businesses, and be entrepreneurial, and the capitalism is very strong. So if you take all this together, low income taxes, super efficient economy, super efficient government, everything's done electronically, whatever you need with the government's online, electronic, etc. Very low corruption. And you have no VAT tax, you have no tax on foreign income, you have no tax on capital gains, you have no tax on interest, nothing like that. It encourages a lot of people to actually go out there, and instead of trying to figure out ways to avoid the rules or to make the rules more efficient or to go around the rules, etc., it encourages people to actually focus on what's most important, which is creating wealth and, you know, creating a capitalist successful economy. So I'll pause there. I think those are like 3 or 4 big topics that should hopefully give you guys some interesting things to think about in Brazil. And I'm happy to answer, you know, any other questions you might have, depending on what's most interesting to you.
Luan, maybe your turn to ask something if you have.
So,
Or
I was thinking here, it's a heaven for years to live in US. The tax system in US is a paradise for us in Brazilian, because, you know, our tax system here in Brazil is more and more complex than you can imagine. But,
yeah.
But do you live it? Have you ever been in another country like Hong Kong? Have you ever been in New Zealand or Switzerland? Do you know if we have another country like that in the world?
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question. You said, have I ever been to New Zealand, and do we have a country like New Zealand?
No, a country that has the same system that you have in Hong Kong. No, free markets that work well.
The country I can think of, which is there's some that I can think of. Singapore would be a good example of one that is close. My family has lived in Singapore as well. I've not lived there myself, so I don't know it as well as I do Hong Kong. Singapore is also a very low tax country. It's slightly higher than Hong Kong. It's in the 20s. It's not 17%. But it's also very much like encourages capital investment, etc. They do have a small VAT tax. So there's some VAT tax in Singapore compared to Hong Kong. But Singapore also functions very much like that. Singapore is strategically located with like a big hub to the Southeast Asia. So Hong Kong functions as a big gateway to China. Singapore is basically like a big access point to Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, all of the Southeast Asian countries. So there are other examples that I can think of similar to that. If you're looking for in other continents, of course, there are examples of countries in Europe which have more favorable tax treatments than others, particularly Ireland and the Netherlands. I have never lived in either one of those countries. I've done some work in the past where I've helped companies structure taxes, but it's not an area of expertise that I can go into in terms of talking about like taxes in Ireland and Netherlands, just because I've never lived there. But there are other examples of countries in the world where you are surrounded by very high tax rate countries, like, for example, like Netherlands is surrounded by, you have France, you got, a couple other countries around you which are very high tax paying. And as a result, like, companies always find efficient ways to optimize their taxes. And you end up with, if you want to look out of interest, actually, there's a very interesting concept in tax land. It's called the Irish-Dutch sandwich. Basically, where you hold intellectual property in one country, you license it to another country, one country being Netherlands, the Holland, one country being Ireland, and you like come up with these really complicated arrangements where you own the intellectual property, but you're licensing it and you're collecting the revenue in Ireland, but you're repaying the debt to etc. And you can look it up and read it. I'm by no means an expert in it, but basically by doing that you achieve a close to a 0% tax rate on your revenue in Europe. So if you're a big international company, let's say pick a big company headquartered in America, you're doing business in Europe, there's a lot of press and articles written about this because companies, the big and the rich, will always find the way to make it the most optimal. So the more rules that you put in place and the more complicated you make it, in my opinion, you hurt more the middle and the lower class, right? Because if I am a big $10 billion US company and I want to do business in Europe, I'm going to find the best accountants, the best lawyers, the best everything, and I'm going to set up this crazy Dutch-Irish tax sandwich where my revenue is funneled and like flipped back and forth and goes through Ireland and then comes back to the Netherlands and does all this crazy stuff, and it drops my tax rate to almost zero, right? But if you are the bakery owner in Paris and you just run like a small little bakery and you're selling croissants on the streets of Paris, like, the tax law is enormous, right? And you don't have the resources to deal with it, and you're burdened, and you effectively have no choice but you just take it for what it is and pay the taxes, the higher taxes, because you don't have the resources to optimize everything. So the more rules and the more complicated you make it, in my opinion, you end up benefiting the rich at the expense of the poor. And I don't know what it's like in Brazil, but I can imagine, because we have looked at investments in Brazil, and it's very complicated, and we generally we've looked at a couple of investments in Brazil, and when I see something, oh, it's in Brazil, everyone's like, oh, like we need to get a lot of lawyers and a lot of accountants and figure out exactly what's going on here. And we have companies that have like subsidiaries and they do business in Brazil, and we're all like, okay, we need some serious experts to help us figure this out, right? But if you're the little guy or like the small business in Brazil, you don't have those experts. You don't have those resources to figure it out. So the more complex and complicated the rules become, the more you benefit the people who can afford to deal with the rules at the expense of the people who have no choice but to suffer through the rules.
Let me just say one thing. That thing you said about the government writing you a check and giving that part of your money that you paid in taxes, that's unbelievable. I mean, extraordinary. I cannot imagine that happening here.
Yes.
Tom, my question right now is about what do you think is the first thing you have to do to have a system like Hong Kong here in Brazil? What you would recommend to government to do here right now to wholly have a free market here? What the first?
Yeah, Luan, let's put the question as what suggestions Tom would make to make the United States resemble more Hong Kong, because he knows the United States more, and I think that many of the issues the United States is going through now, it's what Brazil is also having issue with. So maybe that will make him give a better answer.
Yes.
Okay. A little bit of this is going to be somewhat of a repeat of other things I've already said before, but let me try to summarize. I think you have to start with the simplicity. If you think about it in the United States, right, like I file taxes for the federal government, I file taxes for the state government, I file taxes for New York City separately. I do 3 different sets of taxes, right? All of that, and now we have companies all over the country. We do taxes in every one of the 50 states in the country. Like our tax forms, it's like, you need basically a truck to drive the tax forms around. Like no one can understand that. No one can keep up with that. So if you take a system like Hong Kong, where it's so simple, how much did you make minus $15,000 times 17% equals your tax? Okay, like half of the lawsuits in America would disappear. Like, you sue each other because like, oh, did you mean this? Did you mean this? Like all of that money and all of that effort that's put into maintaining the complex system and resolving, etc., etc. Like there's so many deductions, right? So many exceptions. Oh, like, okay, if, for example, like if I spend $100 this month commuting to work, then if I can show proof of commuting, then I can deduct that from my paycheck. Okay, well, why is the government getting involved in figuring out whether I spend $100 commuting to work or $150 commuting to work, right? That's crazy. Like the government shouldn't be doing that. If the government thinks that people should have $100 more to commute to work, then the minimum deductible that you have tax-free shouldn't be $15,000, should be $15,100. And then stop having to send all your receipts to the government and proving that you like spend an extra $100, etc. Right? If there's all sorts of deductions and expenses, and it makes the system so complicated and so burdensome that it's very hard to deal with. The second thing I would say is the government should focus on making the basic laws very clear, and then it should focus its core efforts on resolving disputes and enforcing those laws. But it should stop there. And when it goes a lot farther than that, right? Like I've grown up just after the fall of the communist era in Eastern Europe. Like when the government goes away from, here are the rules of living in society, we're going to help you enforce them and we're going to help you resolve any issues you might have, and stop, then you end up going even farther and farther and farther, and eventually you go all the way to the other extreme where the government says, okay, this year we make 1,000 kilograms of mustard, and next year we make 1,000 kilograms of ketchup. Like, that's not the government's business. The government is never going to be big enough or efficient enough to allocate capital to make decisions to decide whether this part of the country, needs to have an apartment building, and this part of the country should be a farm field. Like, the government should set laws, and that was one of the founding principles behind Hong Kong. If you read what some of the founders, the first British people who've set up the colony, and their view on government was, the government should make the basic laws and the rules and the order for the society, and then they should enforce them to make sure that the society is in order. And yes, there should be some social welfare to help the poor, etc. In terms of for example, Hong Kong provides education, it provides healthcare, it provides low-income housing, etc. So there's services like that. But the government shouldn't get involved in, helping decide and like for example, like I know it's all over here, like, oh, this part gets a tax incentive and you can like claim this form and then you can get a deduction. But, oh, if you went like 10 kilometers somewhere else, you'll get a different tax incentive and then you can do like this other deduction. Or if you come to DC and you spend millions of dollars, on lobbying and making your voice heard with the senators and the congressmen, then hopefully like maybe they'll vote in your favor on the next bill, right? Like there's a lot of that going in Hong Kong. It's like, well, Hong Kong doesn't make bills about like, whether the government should be involved in this or should be doing that or etc. The government just says, here are the laws, like you can't cheat, you can't steal, you can't do blah, 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 blah. If you have any issues, come to us, we'll help you resolve it. And that's it. Like everybody go out there and be productive, like start doing things, make, businesses, set up economies, come up with wealth creation. But, don't spend your entire life like, figuring out like this very complex system which doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Tom. And one thing that catches our attention is that how quickly Hong Kong became an economic superpower. I think like before, I think 1950s, Hong Kong had about 1/3 of the GDP per capita as of England, right? And after the English left Hong Kong had about 1/3 more, about 50 years later, right? That was the start basically of the development, and the end of the British rule of Hong Kong was about just 50 years.
Yep.
And
Yep.
And they were able to grow the Hong Kong economy and made it become bigger than the English economy in the space of about just 50 years. And that shows us that it's possible, right? And the free market works, and the free market works very fast
Yes.
in this sense.
The one thing I would add to that is it's difficult for many countries, I think, to make that transition, because once you end up with a system that is built on complexity and very much of, a difficult system in terms of like lots of laws and regulations and exceptions and all that, each one of them benefits somebody, right? And they're all very small things, right? Like, it's ideal to have a tax form with 3 lines, but well, you put in this exception and that exception, and then there's this and there's this special, and etc. And because of all these special parties, everyone has an interest to protect that little exception because it benefits somebody, right? So it's very easy to add, oh, don't worry, the tax form will be simple. It will only be 4 lines, and then there's this one exception. Oh, and then we'll add another exception. And then we'll add another exception. Oh, and then we'll also, these people, we'll give them an exception too, right? And eventually you end up with millions of lines of paper and etc. It's very complicated. And then you end up with this very complicated system, and then you say, well, but nobody's paying my taxes, right? If I lower my tax rates, I'm already not collecting enough money as the government, and everybody knows that, if someone makes $100,000 and I tax them at 30%, then I should make $30,000 as the government. And if you're telling me like, oh, I should lower my taxes to 25%, but then I'll only collect $25,000 in taxes, right? The difference is what people don't take into account is the compliance of people actually paying the taxes. Because if I only have to pay 17%, of course I'm going to pay it, especially if it's very simple, right? Like, I want to be a good citizen. I don't want to, do something that's illegal or anything like that. So here's my taxes times 17%. Here's what I owe you. Great, we're done. But now if you give me all these crazy rules and regulations, etc., like, it's so hard for me to comply with that it's scary, because the government has to take that step to open up the economy. But the problem is, initially, you might have, some decrease in revenue, because if you lower taxes, yes, you're going to initially, the first response is you're going to collect less revenue. But if you're at that point where the tax system has become so complicated, right, that, everybody's like having such a hard time dealing with it, and no one can understand it, and therefore no one's paying taxes anyway, then yes, like, it might sound crazy that lowering your taxes might actually increase your revenue in the end. If you make it simpler, if you make it easier for people to comply with the taxes, and if you get rid of all these crazy exceptions that you've built in, and the millions and millions of lines of exceptions and loopholes, and, oh, but you can deduct this, but you can't deduct that, etc., just simplifying it, and then it's going to be a lot easier for people to comply. Because I believe fundamentally, like, if people are given a choice, they would rather be legal than illegal. So if you can make it possible for people to be easier to comply with the law and to pay their taxes and etc., then more people are going to do it. So yes.
I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
Do you think that Hong Kong maybe helped China opening its gates to capitalism and leaving a bit aside of communism, or no?
It's an interesting relationship. So Hong Kong was handed over by the British in 1998, with the instructions to keep it as a special administrative region. It's called SAR. It's basically its own country. It's autonomous. It has its own government, its own laws, and everything, its own currency, everything. And the British said, okay, well, you have to do this for at least 50 years, right? So that was the way that was handed over to China. And you definitely see tension because Hong Kong is very capitalist. It's very free. All the wealthy people from China come to Hong Kong. They buy real estate. That's why the real estate prices in Hong Kong are so high, right? Taxes are very favorable. So if you can, people try to move to Hong Kong to have lower taxes, et cetera, et cetera. So it's naturally creating an interesting relationship where, yes, China is a little more closed up. It's a different political system. The laws are, more complicated. Doing business in China is a lot more complicated. But China sees that Hong Kong is the gateway, and without Hong Kong, it would be difficult for China to open up, right? Because China needs to go slowly. Like, they're not just gonna, like, people think, oh, like, why don't all the Chinese, like, run to Beijing and scream, like, give us freedom? But the Chinese don't, like, they don't think that way, right? Like, for them, the government is, a big part of the way they live. Like, they don't think like, oh, our government is like crazy. Like, it's very much like an American perception. Oh, like the Chinese government is like very closed up and crazy and like communist. Like, why haven't people rallied and like overthrown the government, right? But they're making steps, and because China can see the success of Hong Kong, I think in many ways it is giving them inspiration for, opening things up slowly over time, enabling more businesses in China to privatize them rather than being state-owned, and supporting the stock market and enabling that economy to develop, because at the end of the day, the right hand of capitalism will be more efficient at allocating resources than a single communist party. And we've seen that through examples in Eastern Europe and Russia, etc. So I think they see that as example. I think that's also the reason why Hong Kong has remained very independent, even though it is part of China, because China knows that without this gateway, it would be very difficult for many foreign companies to come do business with them. So it's in their own incentive to keep Hong Kong as this like little special place, the bridge that helps to bridge the gap between the capitalist world out there and the different world in China. And that bridge is serving as like the connection, the pipe, the tube that has, allows things to go through. And, imagine you're connecting, two water tanks, one with blue color and one with red color, and you have this tube, and over time the water will mix, and the colors, like you get different ideas and you get inspirations, and you learn from the mistakes. You're like, oh, actually, like maybe the blue color isn't that bad. Oh, maybe the red color has some advantages too. And because of that, there's a very good relationship that way, I think. That said, there's also a lot of friction, because of what you have seen is China is a very much of a government that likes to control the way things are done. And as a result, you have a country like Hong Kong with a democratic system, etc. That's why you've seen all the protests that they've had over the past year, because effectively the Chinese government says, yes, you can vote for the people that you want for your government, but it has to be one of these like pre-selected people. Right? So it's kind of like, oh, wait, hold on. So it's not like all the people in Hong Kong are like, stop. Like, that's not really democracy if you can tell me I can only vote for one of these people, right? I want to vote for whoever I want. And that's starting to cause some tension, because China, just what I said, like the blue and the red tank, and they're mixing a little bit. China realizes, and they get the influence of, the positive things from capitalism and from free economy and from trade, making China open up more. But there's also a little bit of flow the other way, where China's starting to, exercise a little bit more control over Hong Kong and, how things are out there, and influencing Hong Kong with, okay, yes, you can still keep voting, but it's going to have to be one of these pre-selected people, right? So you can see the relationship going both ways.
Tom, we are in the end, so I have a good, simple question now. Tom, do you think Hong Kong can keep this small government forever?
Can they keep the small government forever?
Yeah. Do you think
it
will not
has been
grow
very good.
like happened in the United States?
I think they can. Hong Kong I think it's a very unique place where it could work. It's a wealthy country. It's easier to do these things in a country where there is a lot of wealth and a lot of economic activity. So I think the potential is definitely there. The government is very focused on staying efficient and on supporting the economy and the capitalist freedom. So I think the potential is definitely there for them to keep doing it. Yes. I think the bigger fact is what's going to happen with the influence from China. I think it's less of a question of does Hong Kong want to keep doing it? Will the people and the government there keep doing it? I think that's a smaller risk. I think the bigger risk is, China has 50 years where they've said, okay, this will remain a separate autonomous region. But what happens in 50 years, right? Like, China could theoretically come in and say, okay, this was fun, ha ha ha, okay, we're done, right? Like, I think that's the bigger risk than Hong Kong itself becoming, more anti-capitalist, because people have had a lot of benefit from the way things have been done, and they see the value and they realize that there's value in simplicity, efficiency, and low taxes, etc. So given how successful they have been in that, and they're the leader, in my opinion, one of the best countries in the world in terms of doing all that. And as a result, I think they have the potential to keep doing it. I think the bigger risk is what happens with the handover and the transition and China exercising more power. Sounds good?
Perfect. So, Jose, what do you think? Jose, what do you think?
What did you say, Lon?
What do you think? I think
No,
it's
I
okay.
think Hong Kong. I think Hong Kong in the past, I think 20 years was the #1 in the Heritage Foundation Economic Index, Freedom Economic Index. So seems that they've been doing a good job. Since they looks like they have like a good constitution, the government infrastructure seem to have the correct mentality. I am not so sure Tom is, maybe because he lived there and we're used to the Brazilian government. I would not be so confident that Hong Kong would be able to maintain its state, let's say, forever, unless there is a constant effort by the population, which seems to be the case. But the government, we're always very suspicious of government activity, especially as seems to be the case of the Chinese government. So I agree with everything with Tom. Because of our Brazilian background, suspicious of the Hong Kong situation. True effort by the population of maintaining the freedom there.
So I think that's it, Tom. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, I'm always happy to help.
Good. Yeah, thank you, Tom. Was great talking to you. I think we were able to learn a little bit more about Hong Kong and perhaps see if some things could be a lesson to Brazil.
That would be great. Yeah. Good luck, everyone, and I'm always happy to help. Good luck.
It was an honor. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.